Every teenager thinks they're invisible in a crowded cafeteria, but invisibility is an illusion that shatters the moment someone decides you're worth destroying. And when that moment comes, you discover exactly who you really are beneath the silence. The fluorescent lights of Westfield High's cafeteria cast harsh shadows across rows of packed tables, where conversations merged into a wall of noise that felt almost protective. Almost. Lena Torres had chosen her seat with the same precision her father had taught her to apply to everything. A corner position with unobstructed views of every entrance, every exit, every potential threat. Paranoia, most would call it. She called it survival instinct. The turkey sandwich in front of her was homemade, wrapped in plastic that crinkled too loudly when she opened it. Next to it sat a bruised apple and a carton of milk, simple food that reminded her of better times. Times when her father would sit across from her at their kitchen table, reviewing her day while teaching her lessons that seemed excessive then, but made perfect sense now. Blake Ashford's voice cut through the cafeteria din like a blade through flesh. You know what I find fascinating about transfer students? They always think starting over means they can pretend their past doesn't exist. Lena didn't look up, but her fingers adjusted their position on the tray's edge, muscle memory responding to a threat her conscious mind hadn't yet acknowledged. The institutional plastic felt solid and dependable, an ordinary object that could become extraordinary in trained hands. Blake stood 6 feet away with 4 others flanking him, a formation that seemed casual but was designed to intimidate. His designer clothes screamed privilege, from the expensive watch on his wrist to the athletic jacket that announced his status as captain of Westfield's championship lacrosse team. Everything about him radiated entitlement, the kind that came from 18 years of never hearing the word no. Tyler Brooks stood to Blake's right, phone already out and recording, his father's position as district attorney, providing immunity from consequences. Derek Hayes hunched over his own device to the left, fingers flying across social media platforms with the intensity of someone who believed technology could weaponize information. Grant Morrison loomed behind them all, 6'3" of barely controlled aggression, wrapped in a football jersey that had carried him to regional finals. And Jade Thornton completed their circle, her designer outfit and perfect makeup unable to hide the cruelty that lived behind her eyes. They had been watching Lena for 3 weeks now, ever since she transferred from Oakmont High after her mother found work at Valley Memorial Hospital. The new girl who wore second-hand clothes and kept her head down, never engaging, never drawing attention. They mistook silence for weakness, isolation for vulnerability. They couldn't have been more wrong. Lena's worn backpack rested against her chair, containing everything that mattered. Borrowed textbooks, carefully maintained notebooks, and a wallet holding exactly $19, and a photograph she rarely looked at but never traveled without. Her father, Captain Rafael Torres, standing in his dress uniform, medals telling stories she was only beginning to understand. The scar on her left wrist itched beneath her long sleeve, a thin white line most people would assume came from an accident. They would never guess it was the price of learning knife disarmament techniques in her family's garage, accepting small cuts as the cost of staying alive when facing a blade. Her father had insisted she practice until the movements became automatic, until her body responded faster than her mind could process fear. Blake moved closer, his cologne mixing with the cafeteria's industrial smell. "I'm addressing you directly. It's considered rude to ignore someone who's being friendly." Lena finally raised her eyes, meeting his pale blue gaze with steady calm. Fear was gasoline on a predator's fire, her father had taught her. Show them nothing. "I'm eating lunch. That's all." The simplicity of her response threw Blake off balance. He fed on reactions, emotional displays that confirmed his power over others. Instead, he found himself looking into eyes that seemed far older than 17, eyes that had witnessed things his privileged life couldn't imagine. Tyler smirked behind his camera. "I don't think she knows who you are. Should we educate her?" Derek glanced up from his screen. "Give me 3 minutes and I'll know everything about her. Address, family, social media history, all of it." Grant cracked his knuckles with theatrical menace. "Maybe she needs a lesson in respect." Jade examined her manicured nails with practiced boredom. "Those clothes are definitely thrift store. Someone should teach her about presentation before she embarrasses herself further." The words washed over Lena like rain on stone. She had heard worse from actual enemies who wanted to kill her father, and later from grief counselors who thought they understood trauma. These teenagers with their designer cruelty were insects buzzing around a mountain. She returned her attention to her sandwich, taking measured bites while maintaining peripheral awareness. The cafeteria had grown quieter as students sensed confrontation brewing. Phones appeared in hands throughout the room. Others simply watched with the fascination people showed for disasters. None moved to intervene. This isolation was familiar. She had learned not to expect help from bystanders, just as her father had taught her never to rely on backup that might not arrive. Self-reliance was survival, and survival was the only promise anyone could make. Blake's frustration grew with each second of Lena's apparent indifference. He commanded attention by birthright, his father's position as mayor ensuring that people listened when he spoke. This quiet transfer student was disrupting his carefully maintained social hierarchy, and that could not be tolerated. "Want to know what I think?" His voice carried across the now silent cafeteria. "I think nobody taught you proper manners." "Where's your father anyway?" "Let me guess, walked out when things got complicated." The apple stopped halfway to Lena's mouth. For just a moment, something flickered across her features, too quick for most observers to catch. But Blake was watching carefully now, sensing weakness like a shark scenting blood. Derek looked up from his phone with malicious satisfaction. "Actually, I can answer that. Lena Torres transferred from Oakmont High 3 months ago. Mother works night shift at Valley Memorial. Father was Captain Rafael Torres, died 2 years ago in a single vehicle accident on Route 42 during a storm." The clinical recitation of her personal tragedy hung in the air like poison. Lena set down the apple with deliberate care, movements controlled despite the tremor threatening her hands. She had never heard her father's death described so coldly, reduced to data points by someone who had never known the man who taught her strength. Tyler whistled low. Tragic backstory and poverty. That's like a cliché movie plot. Grant stepped closer, his shadow falling across her table. Maybe that's why she acts strange. Trauma does weird things to people. Jade's laugh could have cut glass. The sad orphan girl trying to reinvent herself at a new school. How utterly predictable. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Lena's breathing became carefully controlled, the technique her father had drilled into her for managing stress. Count to 4, inhaling, hold for 4, exhale for 4, repeat until clarity returned. But clarity was becoming elusive as memories threatened to overwhelm her. Blake recognized signs of someone breaking down and pressed his advantage. "I bet he was drunk, right?" That's usually how these tragic accidents happen. Drunk soldier can't handle his problems, decides to solve them permanently. The plastic tray creaked under pressure from Lena's grip, knuckles white as she fought to maintain control, fought to honor her father's memory by not giving these predators the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. But Blake was relentless, sensing victory. "Did you watch it happen? Were you in the car when he decided to end it all?" His eyes found the thin white line beneath her sleeve. "Or did you do that to yourself afterward?" Trying to join him, Derek provided commentary like a sports announcer. "Look at her face. I think we found the pressure point. Tyler held his phone higher. This is definitely going viral. Unstable transfer student has breakdown in cafeteria. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now, hundreds of students watching the systematic destruction of someone they barely knew. Some looked uncomfortable, but did nothing. Others watched with hungry fascination. A few seemed genuinely distressed, but not enough to intervene. Her father's voice whispered from memory. "Princess, when someone tries to hurt you with words, remember that pain is temporary, but weakness is permanent. You are stronger than their cruelty." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Blake. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the silent cafeteria. "My father died serving his country and never drank a single day in his life. He was driving home from a parent-teacher conference when hydroplaning caused his accident. This scar is from learning self-defense, which he taught me because he knew there would always be people like you." The simple dignity of her response caught Blake off guard. He had expected tears, screaming, complete collapse. Instead, he faced someone who refused to be diminished by his cruelty. Grant stepped forward, using his size to intimidate. "Nobody asked for your life story. Maybe you should learn when to shut up." Jade circled to Lena's other side, completing an aggressive formation that trapped her against the wall. "Your sob story is making everyone uncomfortable. Can't you just be normal?" Tyler moved to block potential escape routes while continuing to record. "Rich kids versus tragic orphan. Place your bets on how this ends." Derek provided additional information from sources he shouldn't have accessed. Says here, she lived in military housing until age 15, military brat trying to adjust to civilian life. That explains the weirdness. But Lena was no longer listening to their words. Instead, she processed tactical information with clarity her father had drilled into her during countless training sessions. 5 opponents positioned to limit movement, multiple recording devices, crowd of witnesses but no allies, environmental factors, plastic chair, metal table, lunch tray that could serve as shield or weapon. The muscle memory was automatic now, her body shifting into ready position without conscious thought. Weight balanced evenly on both feet, center of gravity lowered slightly, hands positioned for optimal response time. To casual observers, she simply looked like someone who had decided to stand up. But anyone with combat training would recognize a fighter preparing for engagement. Blake noticed the change in her posture and felt a flicker of uncertainty. Something about how she held herself reminded him of the security personnel at his father's political events. Professionals who looked relaxed but ready. But that was impossible. This was just some traumatized teenager from a broken home. "You know what I think happened?" he continued, trying to regain control. "I think your father couldn't handle raising someone like you, so he took the easy way out. Left you and your mother to figure out life without him because he was too weak to deal with reality." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the cafeteria held its collective breath, sensing something significant was about to happen. Some students began reaching for phones to call for help, though whether for Lena or for Blake remained unclear. Lena stood up slowly, movements fluid and controlled, despite being surrounded by 5 people who clearly meant her harm. The plastic chair scraped against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. She was smaller than all of them, appeared defenseless, and by every logical measure should have been terrified. Instead, she looked each of her tormentors in the eye with the calm assessment of a professional evaluating threats. Her father had taught her that size and numbers meant nothing if opponents underestimated your capabilities. Sometimes the smallest person in the room was also the most dangerous. "Last chance," she said quietly, voice carrying despite its softness. "Walk away now, and we can all pretend this never happened." Blake laughed, the sound echoing off the cafeteria walls. "Are you threatening us?" Did the sad orphan girl just threaten 5 people who could destroy her life with a single phone call? Tyler zoomed in with his camera. This is priceless. Classic underdog story, except she forgot the part where she actually has power. Derek waved his phone triumphantly. Already posted her home address on 3 different platforms. By tonight, everyone will know exactly where she lives. Grant flexed his hands menacingly. Maybe it's time someone taught you about consequences. Jade examined her reflection in her phone screen. Honestly, this is getting tedious. Can we just finish this so I can fix my makeup? But something had changed in the atmosphere around their corner of the cafeteria. Other students were backing away now, creating a wider circle around the confrontation. Some primal instinct warned them they were about to witness something unprecedented. Lena remained perfectly still, dark eyes tracking each movement, each gesture, each subtle shift in positioning. Her breathing was controlled and steady, pulse calm despite adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. This was the moment her father had prepared her for, though neither had imagined it would come in a high school cafeteria. The lunch tray sat on the table beside her, innocent plastic that had suddenly become the most important object in the room. Her fingers brushed its edge, feeling weight and balance, calculating angles and force vectors with unconscious precision. Her father's voice whispered from memory, reminding her that any object could become a weapon in trained hands. Blake took another step forward, bringing himself within arm's reach. His expensive cologne couldn't mask the scent of aggression and entitled anger. He had never been denied anything in his privileged life, and he wasn't about to start now. "You're going to apologize," he said, voice dropping to what he probably thought was an intimidating whisper. "You're going to apologize to me, to my friends, and to everyone in this cafeteria for wasting our time with your pathetic story. Then you're going to transfer to a different school where people like you belong." Lena's grip on the lunch tray shifted almost imperceptibly, thumb finding the optimal pressure point, while fingers maintained perfect balance. The movement was so subtle that none of her tormentors noticed, but it transformed ordinary cafeteria equipment into something far more dangerous. "I'm not going anywhere," she said simply. The quiet certainty in her voice made Blake's jaw clench with frustrated rage. He had never encountered someone who refused to be intimidated by his wealth, connections, or carefully cultivated reputation. This nobody girl with her thrift store clothes and tragic backstory was making him look weak in front of the entire school. Grant moved closer, massive frame casting a shadow over Lena's table. "Maybe you didn't hear him correctly." Tyler kept his camera rolling, already imagining the engagement this video would generate. "This is so much better than anything on social media." Derek continued his digital assault, posting personal information about Lena across multiple platforms. Her mom works night shifts, probably goes home to an empty house every day. How pathetic is that? Jade moved to block Lena's path to the main exit. Designer heels clicking against polished floor like a countdown timer. "Seriously, just give up already. You can't win against us." The 5 of them had Lena surrounded now, but something felt wrong to those watching from the sidelines. Instead of cowering or begging, she seemed to grow more centered, more focused. Her posture radiated a calm readiness, completely at odds with her desperate situation. A sophomore at a nearby table whispered to her friend, "Why isn't she scared?" "I'd be crying by now." Her friend shrugged uncertainly. "Maybe she's in shock. People react weird to trauma sometimes." But Lena wasn't in shock. She was in the zone her father had taught her to find during training. That place of perfect clarity where time slowed down and every detail became crystal clear. She could see the slight tremor in Tyler's hand from holding his phone too long, smell Grant's nervous sweat beneath his aggressive cologne, hear Jade's irregular breathing that betrayed excitement at witnessing someone's destruction. Most importantly, she could see the gaps in their formation, the openings that would appear when they moved, the precise sequence of actions that would neutralize each threat in turn. Her father had always said the best battles were won before the first blow was struck, through superior preparation and tactical awareness. Blake reached for her lunch tray, intending to sweep it aside in a gesture of dominance. It was exactly the move Lena had been waiting for, the trigger that would transform her from victim to warrior in the space between heartbeats. His fingers touched the plastic edge just as Lena's training took over completely, her body moving with precision and purpose that would have made her father proud. The cafeteria was about to learn why Captain Rafael Torres had spent years preparing his daughter for a world full of predators. The plastic edge of the lunch tray felt cold against Blake's fingertips as he attempted to sweep it aside, but Lena's grip held firm. For a split second, confusion flickered across his features. The tray should have moved easily, scattered her lunch across the floor in a dramatic gesture of dominance. Instead, it remained perfectly still, as if bolted to the table. That momentary confusion cost him everything. The impact was instantaneous when Lena moved. Her right hand shot out with surgical precision, catching Blake's wrist in a grip that immobilized his entire arm. Her thumb found the pressure point her father had shown her, applying exactly the right amount of force to cause overwhelming pain without permanent damage. Blake's confident expression transformed into shocked agony as his nervous system registered sensations he had never experienced. His legs buckled, and only Lena's controlled grip on his wrist prevented him from collapsing completely. The teenager who had dominated Westfield High's social hierarchy was suddenly helpless in the hands of someone he had dismissed as weak. Tyler tried to rush forward, still holding his phone camera, but Lena was already moving. She released Blake's wrist and pivoted, the lunch tray in her left hand sweeping around in a controlled arc that caught Tyler in the solar plexus. The impact drove air from his lungs and sent him staggering backward into a nearby table, his phone clattering across the floor as he gasped for breath. Grant roared with fury and charged forward like an enraged bull. Superior size and strength focused on overwhelming this impossible girl through sheer force. But Lena had been expecting exactly this response. She dropped low as he approached, her right leg sweeping out in a perfectly executed ankle sweep that caught both of Grant's feet simultaneously. His momentum carried him forward, even as his foundation disappeared beneath him. He crashed into the table where Lena had been sitting, chairs scattering as his massive frame sent everything flying. The impact stunned him long enough for Lena to regain her footing, already tracking her remaining opponents. Derek stood frozen, his phone hanging limply in his hand as his brain struggled to process what he was witnessing. This wasn't supposed to happen. The quiet transfer student was supposed to be the victim, not some kind of expert systematically dismantling his entire friend group. Jade screamed and lunged forward with perfectly manicured nails extended like claws, aiming for Lena's face with desperate fury. But Lena caught her wrist in mid-strike, applying pressure to the nerve cluster at the base of her palm. Jade's hand went numb instantly, her aggressive momentum carrying her past Lena and into the wall behind her. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. 4 of Westfield High's most feared students lay scattered around the cafeteria like broken toys, while their target stood calmly in the center of the chaos, barely breathing hard from her exertions. The cafeteria erupted in shocked gasps and excited chatter as hundreds of students tried to process what they had just witnessed. Cell phones appeared everywhere, recording the aftermath of the most spectacular reversal in the school's history. Social media feeds lit up with videos and commentary as footage spread beyond the school's boundaries. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as a terrified whisper. "What are you?" Lena looked at him with something that might have been pity. "I'm someone who was taught to defend herself." Principal Vaughan arrived with school security close behind, pushing through the crowd of excited students to reach the scene of the disturbance. She was a stern woman in her 50s who had dealt with countless teenage conflicts, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that greeted her. Blake sat on the floor holding his wrist, face pale with shock and residual pain. Tyler was still struggling to catch his breath, doubled over beside an overturned table. Grant groaned as he tried to untangle himself from a pile of scattered chairs. Jade leaned against the wall, flexing her numb fingers with bewildered confusion. And in the center of it all stood Lena Torres, still holding her lunch tray, looking more composed than any of the supposed victors of the confrontation. "What happened here?" Principal Vaughan demanded, authoritative voice cutting through the crowd's chatter. Before anyone could answer, dozens of students began talking at once, voices overlapping in excited explanation. The consensus was clear and unanimous. Blake Ashford and his friends had surrounded and harassed the new girl until she finally defended herself with skills none of them had seen coming. Officer Coleman, the school's resource officer, studied the scene with professional interest. His 20 years in law enforcement had taught him to read the aftermath of violence, and everything he saw supported the students' account. The positioning of the participants, the nature of their injuries, the calm demeanor of the supposed aggressor, all of it pointed to a textbook case of self-defense. Principal Vaughan pulled Lena aside while Officer Coleman interviewed witnesses and checked on the injured students. None of Blake's group required medical attention beyond ice packs and bruised egos, but their injuries were clearly visible evidence of a brief but decisive encounter. "Miss Torres," the principal began, consulting the file hastily retrieved from the office, "I need to understand exactly what happened here today." Lena set down her lunch tray on a nearby table, the simple action somehow more significant after everything it had been through. "They surrounded me and began making cruel comments about my father's death. When one of them tried to grab me, I defended myself using techniques my father taught me." Her calm recounting of events contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. Officer Coleman approached with his notebook, having completed preliminary interviews with witnesses. "Principal Vaughan, I've spoken with 15 different students who all tell the same story. Miss Torres was eating alone when she was approached and harassed by the Ashford boy and his friends. Multiple witnesses confirmed that she tried to defuse the situation peacefully before any physical contact occurred." The officer's expression was professionally neutral, but Lena detected a note of approval in his voice. "The young lady only acted when she was physically grabbed, which legally constitutes assault and justifies her response under self-defense statutes." From across the cafeteria, Mayor Ashford arrived with the righteous fury of a man whose son had never faced real consequences for his actions. His expensive suit and political bearing commanded attention as he strode through the crowd of students and faculty. "I demand to know why my son is being treated like a criminal when he's clearly the victim here," Mayor Ashford announced before anyone could brief him on the situation. "This girl obviously has serious psychological problems and should not be allowed around normal students." Principal Vaughan held up a hand to forestall the mayor's rant. "Mayor Ashford, I understand your concern, but the evidence suggests a very different sequence of events than what you're describing." Officer Coleman stepped forward with diplomatic skill that came from dealing with angry parents and political figures. "Sir, your son and his friends initiated this confrontation and made the first physical contact. Miss Torres's actions were entirely within her legal rights as self-defense. But Mayor Ashford was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially not when his son's reputation was at stake. I don't care what these witnesses think they saw. No normal teenage girl could do what she did to 4 healthy young men. She's obviously been trained in violence and represents a danger to other students." His words carried the implicit threat of political consequences for anyone who disagreed with his version of events. Principal Vaughan had worked in education long enough to recognize the pressure that came from powerful parents, but she also had a responsibility to protect all her students, including Lena. The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Daniels, Westfield High's newest faculty member and the school's JROTC instructor. He was a quiet man in his 40s who rarely involved himself in administrative matters, but something about the scene in the cafeteria had drawn his attention. "Principal Vaughan," he said, approaching the group with measured steps. "I couldn't help but overhear the discussion about Miss Torres's defensive techniques." Daniel studied Lena with the experienced eye of someone who had seen combat and recognized the signs in others. Her posture, her breathing, the way she held herself despite being the center of a highly charged situation, all of it spoke to training that went far beyond typical teenage self-defense classes. "Miss Torres," he said directly to her, "would you mind if I asked who taught you those techniques?" They were very professionally executed. Lena met his gaze steadily, recognizing something familiar in his bearing and demeanor. "My father taught me. Captain Rafael Torres, Special Forces." Daniel's expression shifted slightly, a mixture of respect and understanding crossing his features. "I served with Special Forces during my 3rd deployment. Your father's unit had a reputation for producing soldiers who could handle themselves in any situation." The military connection changed the atmosphere of the entire conversation. Officer Coleman nodded with new respect, while Principal Vaughan gained a clearer understanding of why Lena's defensive capabilities were so impressive. Mayor Ashford, however, remained unmoved by the revelations. "I don't care if her father was a general. My son has rights, and he's been assaulted by someone with military training. This is a clear case of excessive force." Daniels turned to face the mayor with calm authority that came from years of military service. "With respect, sir, your son initiated physical contact against someone who was trying to avoid confrontation. Miss Torres used exactly the amount of force necessary to neutralize multiple attackers while ensuring that none of them suffered permanent injury. That level of restraint speaks to exceptional training and discipline. The defense of her actions from someone with military credibility provided validation that Lena hadn't realized she needed. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt like someone understood not just what had happened, but why it had been necessary. Principal Vaughan made her decision with the weight of witness testimony, legal precedent, and professional judgment behind her. Miss Torres will receive a 3-day suspension as required by our zero-tolerance policy regarding physical altercations. However, this will be classified as justifiable self-defense, and no disciplinary record will be placed in her permanent file. The compromise satisfied no one completely, but represented the best outcome possible given the political pressures and legal realities involved. Lena would face consequences for her actions, but they would not follow her beyond high school. Mayor Ashford's face flushed with anger at what he perceived as insufficient punishment. "This is not over. I'll be speaking with the school board and the superintendent about this decision." As the crowd began to disperse and normal cafeteria operations slowly resumed, Daniels approached Lena with something in his hand. It was a simple business card, cream-colored with minimal text. "Miss Torres, I think you might benefit from connecting with others who understand your background and training. This organization provides support and opportunities for military families, especially those who have lost loved ones in service." Lena took the card and glanced at it briefly before slipping it into her pocket. The text was unremarkable, just a name and phone number for what appeared to be a veteran support group. But in the bottom right corner was a small symbol that made her heart skip a beat. It was the same symbol that appeared on her father's watch, the one he had worn every day but never explained. A simple geometric design she had assumed was just a manufacturer's logo. But seeing it again in this context suggested something far more significant. Her father's training had prepared her for many things, but it had not prepared her for the possibility that his death might have left behind mysteries that were only now beginning to surface. The business card felt heavier in her pocket than its physical weight could account for, carrying implications that would reshape her understanding of everything she thought she knew. The memory of that watch surfaced with startling clarity. Her father had worn it constantly, even during their training sessions when most jewelry would have been impractical. She had asked him about it once when she was 12, tracing the small symbol with her finger while they sat together after a particularly intense lesson. He had smiled and said it was just something from his military days, nothing important. But the way his expression had shifted, the slight tension that entered his voice, suggested there had been more to the story. Now she wondered what else he had kept from her. The techniques he had taught her were certainly beyond standard military training, requiring precision and control that spoke to specialized instruction. His knowledge of pressure points, joint manipulation, and tactical awareness had seemed natural at the time, just part of what made him an exceptional soldier. But Daniels's recognition of her skills suggested a level of training that was far from ordinary. The cafeteria around her was slowly returning to normal, but Lena felt disconnected from the mundane reality of high school life. Students whispered and pointed as they passed, their conversations punctuated by words like amazing and incredible and did you see that? She had become something of a legend in the span of 10 minutes. But fame felt hollow when weighed against the questions now burning in her mind. Her mother would be arriving soon to pick her up, another conversation that would require careful navigation. How much did her mother know about her father's true background? Had she been complicit in keeping secrets, or was she as unaware as Lena herself had been? Daniels watched her from across the cafeteria, his expression thoughtful and slightly concerned. There was recognition in his eyes. He knew more than he had revealed, and that knowledge connected somehow to the symbol that had appeared twice in her life with no explanation. As Lena gathered her belongings and prepared to leave the cafeteria, she realized that defending herself against Blake Ashford and his friends had been the easy part. The real challenges were just beginning, and they would require different kinds of strength than anything her father had taught her. The symbol on the business card burned in her memory like a question that demanded answers, and Lena Torres was determined to find them, no matter where they might lead or what truths they might reveal about the man she thought she had known completely.